If a school is going to teach your babies how to hate themselves, it must die and your baby must live. If schooling will teach you to hate your family and your beloved because they have a different way of being in the world, then schooling must die. Yes. So you can live.
We are here with the one and only, one of the most famous activists of our time.
Come on. Okay. It's how we doing it.
He's traveled the world. I would say the country for a lot. He's traveled the world.
Or the world has traveled on me.
Well, we might get into that today.
From the top.
From the top. I want y'all to welcome the one and only Pastor Michael McBride.
Yo, what's happening?
Welcome.
Live
Man,
free.
Thank y'all for letting the bootleg preacher come hang out with you. Wonderfully bright and brilliant people.
Oh, Lord.
What a gift.
This is going to be happening for the next hour or so.
It's
All
gonna
right.
be what?
The Pastor Mike is one of those people who's, when they introduce you to other people, it's usually about 5 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
And he definitely writes you into history with way more than you have ever done or probably will ever do. I think it's a brilliant pedagogy, actually. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes while I deny it and I say, oh, stop, I be feeling myself after a Pastor Mike introduction. So it's twofold.
It should be.
Yeah. I like it. Can you share a little bit about yourself, what you do on a daily, weekly basis? And we'll start there.
Well, my name is Michael McBride, as has been stated. I am a native of San Francisco. I live in Oakland currently, and I pastor a church in Berkeley, so I'm a Bay Area kid through and through. But I'm from the city. San Francisco produced me. Obviously, I'm the product of my parents, but I did grow up in San Francisco, and it's a super, super diverse community. Like even though in the Bayview Hunters Point community is predominantly black, like you grew up with, Latinos, we called them Mexicans back then. We grew up with Samoans. And even sometimes there was white folks running around. Like you grew up with a little bit of everybody, and you kind of had to learn. You just learned how to get along with people that were different. Obviously, within our communities, there was always some kind of set tripping and stuff that we all fell into, but generally, you realized from jump that there were more perspectives out there than just your own, and so I love the city. I love everything about it. I love growing up cheering for the 49ers my whole young life, and watching them win championships. Lots of great memories in the city. So I love it. I don't like what it seems to have become. It seems like a dystopian place with lots of failed leadership and imagination. But I got a special place in my heart for the city for sure.
Indeed. So you were very modest in your introduction of self, and I, tried to do a Pastor Mike introduction of you. But like you're doing really important work. Can you say both, like, what is the nature of your work? And then on the other side of that, which is more important to me, is how did you come into that work?
Yeah, so Live Free, which is alongside with the church is the container myself and a whole number of folks have built for the last almost 20 years that is seeking to take seriously that we don't have to accept the conditions of violence and trauma and exploitation, racism, anti-Black hatred and malice, that we just don't have to accept that as it's perpetrated in the systems of our city, state, country. And so we've tried to build a network that takes seriously that everyday people who are directly impacted by gun violence, criminal injustice or the criminal legal system, police violence, people who are getting their rights systematically kind of stripped away in very incremental but real ways. We've tried to take seriously that through community organizing, we could slow down that process. On a good day, we could advance justice, and hopefully week to week we can create relief, for people. And so we've built a network. It was kind of birthed and incubated during my time with the PICO National Network, which has renamed itself to the Faith in Action Network. We launched a campaign there in 2009, 10, 11 called Lifelines to Healing. Really emerged out of me working in the continuation school in Berkeley while I was pastoring and just burying children, burying teenagers and students, and, just not feeling like I was doing enough. We were doing enough given the tools and the gifts and the skills God placed in my hands. And so, it really became just an extension in my mind of just me trying to be a good pastor, a good, caretaker of the community that God called me to serve. And it's just kind of grown beyond my wildest dreams and sometimes my own capacity, but that's what Live Free. We've renamed it Live Free, and we've since become our own kind of national network of organizations that are in about, 15 to 20 states, kind of mobilizing largely people of faith in the Black church, Black religious traditions, but also others who have done their own work to be able to sit with and alongside and follow Black leadership in the kind of racial justice, Black prophetic tradition kind of approach. So that's what Live Free is, and it's been a roller coaster ride, that's for sure.
How did you get into this work? Were there certain experiences that informed?
Yeah, I was beat up by some cops in 1999, in March of 1999. And that experience, I was in San Jose. That experience kind of unlocked a lot of rage, but also agency that largely I had imagined would be solely kind of channeled through just trying to build the biggest church you can build and, be T.D. Jakes, Noel Jones, Kenneth Omer, Charles Blake, that was the model, right? You get educated, you have a little bit of charisma and education, and you're just going to build an institution that could help as many people as you can. When I got beat up by the cops, it forced me to have to struggle with my own trauma of that experience, which took me back to experiences growing up in HP during the crack cocaine epidemic and just watching so many friends get caught up in the system, watching a couple folks have to go to jail or die. And so, I think it really forced me to think differently about, is this the most I can do? And I've been asking myself that question for probably well over 30 years now. When I think more deeply about it, I do remember my father used to sit us down every February, and we would watch Eyes on the Prize, and we would watch Kunta Kinte, and so my brother Ben, gave this reflection one time that, made me think of how little did we know, we were kind of getting introduced to the civil rights movement, through that documentary, through that kind of just annual tradition with my father. And so perhaps though that put some seeds in my in my subconscious that the trauma triggered, that made me not feel like I'm just gonna take this abuse and just channel it solely into a, on my way to heaven and oh so glad response, which, most of us do, because we just don't always feel like we have any other kind of tools or ways to respond.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about, your dad, offering that yearly ritual, if you have reflections about maybe what work he or your mom or, the elders in your life, like what they were doing with that feeling, right, on my way to heaven and glad, and how did they respond maybe differently that you draw from today?
During that time?
Yeah.
Well, my parents weren't an activist family by any stretch, not at least since I was born. We're fourth generation holiness Pentecostal people, which means we do speak in tongues and roll on the floor, swing from the chandeliers, and on a good Sunday we levitate. So it wasn't like, we were activist family at all. My aunt, in her teenage years or young adult years, we were told was a Black Panther for a little while. My mom is from San Francisco. My father's from Goldsboro, North Carolina. He does have some stories of him, doing some marching, but, he fought in the Vietnam War, so, he wasn't, and we weren't an activist family. So, yeah, I know it does feel a bit of an outlier, I just think that I think my work in the social justice space has continued to be an outgrowth of just trying to not allow the worst thing to happen to me, like, be something that, like keeps me in a space of paralysis and disempowerment, I certainly don't feel that way anymore. I mean, I think, years ago, I realized that I had more than enough power, agency, tools, resources to smack around the racist police department. But you start to get an analysis that it's not just one police department, and that's when you start to realize the monstrosity and the magnanimity of the problem. And that's where I feel like I still feel compelled to do organizing work or justice ministry or advocacy or be a freedom fighter or just try to be a good human being, because we're living in some strange times, and life is hard for a lot of people, so I think I can certainly say I have a legacy of just, deep spiritual faith, power, like if my family has a superpower, it's like church work. We call that the family business, So, storefront churches back in the day, that's where you learned how to do everything. You learned how to speak. You learned how to play instruments. You learned how to lead. It was like probably your first leadership role. You learned how to work in some, groups with people you probably don't like. So, storefront churches, our church was a storefront church growing up. I think it just was like, it's almost like a leadership. It's just a leadership academy in some respects. And I think the history of leaders the Black church has produced throughout our sojourn here as African people bears that out, at least perhaps up until modern, the last maybe 20, 30 years.
I mean, when you talk about church and kind of the way even that you're approaching it, I don't think people have an understanding of what church is like for you, what your church looks like, how it functions. And from my experiences there.
Yes, testify. Why don't you tell me what it looks like?
It looks very different from the churches that I grew up in and intentionally abandoned, right? We were talking about equity before. I don't really use that word, but I think that there was and has been, what I've experienced is a shift in power dynamics, gendered power dynamics, who's represented in leadership, which epistemologies are centered and matter. You have very different types of people that attend that church. I think there's, especially in the Black church, there's a lot of controversy around sexuality and what's represented, gender, expression. And the way, in a lot of regards, is a very colorful place. And I don't know if the way does not do church in a lot of traditional ways. And I think it attracts a very specific type of people. It attracts a lot of educators from the Bay Area, very those that might consider themselves to be radical. I have a lot of questions about that, but primarily, why? Why do you think your church looks the way it does?
Yeah, I wish I wish I could say I had some grand strategy. When I went to Duke Divinity School. Duke University has a seminary called Duke Divinity School in North Carolina. So I was there for several years, and I felt like while I was there, I was 3 or 4 years after being physically sexually assaulted by the cops in my police brutality space. So, I was kind of working out my own kind of theological questions around why do bad things happen to good people, the question of theodicy, going real deep down into Dr. King's work. I studied with Dr. Emmanuel Katangale, who is a Ugandan Catholic priest whose extended family were caught up in the Rwanda genocide. And so that was very formational for me, because one of the questions he asked about Rwanda, which I think is relevant for the United States, is what was it about a country that claimed to be 90% Christian that you could produce a genocide over 100 days that will kill about 1 million people because the government said so, right? So what is it about the failure of the church's discipleship projects or pedagogy, to use y'all's wonderful educator language? What was it about the failure of discipleship by the churches that could not keep them from killing their neighbors or even members in their own church, out of fear, out of, a form of hatred, out of indifference, all of which seemed to surface in the aftermath. Some people engaged in the killing because they were afraid that if they didn't kill, they would be killed. Some people engaged in the killing because they believed the propaganda from the government. Some people engaged in the killing because they just really had a lot of indifference. They were referring to Tutsis, who are the minority population, as cockroaches for years at a time. And when the government told the Hutus to kill the Tutsis, there was some thought that, they had been called cockroaches for years. So there was some segment of the population that just didn't see them as humans. It was like, yeah, I'm gonna kill a cockroach. These people are here trying to, mess up our country. And so that was a very formative course for me. So when I came back to the Bay Area, I was initially just going to join my pastor, Dr. Oscar Dace and Lady Janice Dace in San Jose at Bible Way Christian Center. And they kind of said, hey, why don't you go take over your family church, which was in need of a pastor at the time. And so I wrote up this big old church planning proposal and just wanted to have a place where you could literally create a faith experience that just engaged people wherever they were. Obviously, I was and still consider myself to be Pentecostal. So, we were grounded in a Black Pentecostal tradition. But the more, I sat with my tradition, it was a very experiential tradition. It had certainly lots of kind of, rigidity in some of its theological kind of assumptions. But the Holy Spirit, as we understand it, is not, you can't put the Holy Spirit in a container, like it moves like the wind, as Jesus says, So I just think that the way just organically grew to attract university students who, like you, that's where I met Tiffany at Cal, and it was Black Campus Ministries, and who Tiffany is today was not who she was back then, and so just imagine walking with people for almost 20 years. Everybody changes, and when you love people, you grow with them as they change. I wasn't gonna kick anybody out of the church because they didn't subscribe to a Black Pentecostal apostolic doctrine. And those relational ties were reciprocal and mutual. I believe in that. I felt I had something to offer as a spiritual leader, as a pastor, as a faith leader, but I also felt like the congregation members had something to offer to teach me and us as well. And it's going into our 19th year of just that dance. And I do think that dance has turned the way into what it is today. Yeah, we got old quick. That's a mean thing.
Not quite the same person you were 19 years ago.
Oh man, I'm not quite the same person I was last year.
I'm not the same person I was last night. Touch your neighbor with consent.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like this is such a coming at such a unique time for me personally. This conversation, I have a lot of history with the church, with churches that were not, would you say, colorful?
That was the term I used.
Not colorful, right? Premised on, if not outright justifying the beatings that our people have taken, some of us personally and survived, maybe asking us to question whether or not what we did had something to do with those beatings. If not outright justifying, at least questioning their ethics. And I think the Black radical tradition, as articulated through the church, has been a space where multiple kinds of truths are being, batted around, memory being forgotten, and then other things being remembered or enacted. Like you said, spirit doesn't function in containers, and so it can find a way to exemplify itself regardless. That's what I believe, at least. And I guess I'm working my way around to this question of in your mind, for the space today, when it comes to activism, how might you be inviting people to lean into the best of that tradition while pushing against the ways that it's been used against us?
Activism or the church? Or both?
The church, or
the church.
Yeah, the Black radical tradition within the church, or Black church.
Yeah, I think I'm still trying. I feel like I'm poking around in the dark a little bit on this question. I mean, do you guys watch Star Wars at all? So I feel like I'm using the Force.
Yeah.
Go for it.
It's not
It's
something
to be with you.
I'm all the way there with you.
It's not something that I think is all the way intelligible, but one thing growing up in the church has given me is a deep compassion for Black church people. Not at the expense of folks who've been pushed out or marginalized, but I know how hard it is to just find a place where you belong and find some semblance of just stability. All right. And knowing that it's dangerous to try to make one space be that for everybody, because there is no one space for everybody. But, you know, if you historicize the conversation around the Black church, I mean, this was the only institution we had. And I certainly wasn't alive during the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, but it's obvious to me there are a lot of people who went to the church and didn't believe in the theology of the church at all. It was there for more than just a theological orthodoxy like battalion, you know. I think the church served as the school Monday through Friday, the club on Saturday night, and then a sacred space to worship the divine on a Sunday morning. And so at its best, historically, the church seems to be a 7-day-a-week enterprise that filled many different needs of Black people at a time when we were in white spaces constantly being killed, lynched, raped, dehumanized, had our families literally on auction blocks. And so, you know, there's a trauma within just the through line of Black people that honestly probably is held disproportionately in the Black church because this is the only enduring institution we have. You know, like when people leave the Black church for valid reasons and right reasons and they build better institutions or more life-giving institutions, the Black church still remains as a 400-year-long like repository of memory and pain and struggle and leadership and failed leadership and lessons and buildings. Like, just imagine what has happened in some of these buildings that have been around since 1789. I was in Columbus, Ohio last year teaching a workshop to some pastors about organizing to end gun violence. And the workshop was held in the basement of this Baptist church in Columbus that they said slaves used to organize to, I think it was slaves used to organize to try and secure their freedom. In a base, it's a church now. Obviously, you know, they redid the basement, but you know, you're in this church that literally had slaves in there like 300-400 years ago trying to get free. And you have buildings like that all across the country. Now, back then, I think people had bigger problems. Africans, you know, enslaved Africans had bigger problems than trying to like figure out, you know, people's sexual orientation, people's theological variance. I mean, he was like, man, this white man out here trying to crack my head, you know, my partner, my children is getting shipped off. So, you know, I think we have gotten the luxury, as which should be afforded to every human being by birth, to actually not just have to focus on the literal survival, right? The longer we've been in this country, but every step along the way, we've had to contend with death and pain. And sometimes that has been reinscribed through the very institution that has also been a big catalyst for us kind of incubating freedom. And so I just say all that to say, like, I think all of us have a choice to make about how we will live into the traditions that have produced us, you know? I certainly don't want to be someone who has to embellish my record of work and ministry when I'm in my 70s, 80s. I don't want my daughters to be reading I'll be like, Daddy didn't do that. You know, he was actually a mean, hateful. He talked about these people when we were at home all the time. And, you know, it was all a performance. Like, you know, I'm trying to be authentic and, you know, but I do think authenticity has to be not just a static reality. Like, I think we all got to appreciate that the best human beings grow and mature and learn and adjust and adapt, but try to do so with integrity and with gentleness and love in your heart. And so, yeah, I feel like the church for me, and even activism, because for all of this in my constellation of the world is just the outgrowth of my faith in Jesus. Like I'm not somebody who believes in I'm sorry, I don't believe in the goodness of human beings. I think that there's a lot of jacked up people out here. I may be one of them for that matter. So I know I need God, I need grace, I need help, I need love, I need patience, I need space. And so, Jesus gives me that, gives me lots of examples. My faith gives me lots of examples of that. And I hope whether I'm doing church work, narrowly defined, or justice work narrowly defined, or just doing life broadly defined, that my faith gives that light off so people can kind of feel the highest kind of form of human flourishing, God. I feel like I'm rambling, sorry.
Don't be sorry. You said a lot about whether we're talking about pedagogy, we're talking about your approach to this work and what you want to be doing and how that looks. And we talked about this walking up in here, is that I have been able over 19 years to be able to watch those approaches.
She knew me when I was skinny.
We've seen a lot of changes, right? And I think
I smiled a lot more, probably. I don't know. I think what is that saying? Youth is wasted on the young. So, when I was 29, like, I really thought I was going to change the world. I was like, man, watch out. And I thought we were building a church that was just going to turn the world upside down. And then you get involved in the justice work and you're like, we're going to do something. And we've done all of that, but it's come at a price, every lesson has it leaves a mark on you. And, Noel Jones, who is,
Grace Jones's brother.
But I'm very
Just found that out.
I'm very good friends. I'm very good friends with his daughter Tiffany, Dr. Tiffany Jones Blakes. She lives in Austin. She's a University of Texas.
Is that the other Tiffany that I get the text for? Okay.
Yes, yes. I'm texting you, thinking I'm texting Tiffany. So he's a very formative kind of voice in my thinking about the synchronistic nature of how you grow. He said this one thing. He says, sometimes God will push you to the edge of your mind in order for you to change your mind, which is just to say that sometimes, Frantz Fanon says this, right? Like you have this idea you hold on to and you just can't believe it's not true. And then you're confronted with evidence that kind of makes you question the idea, and it creates dissonance. And so doing work, the way I've done the work has created so much dissonance that it leaves a mark. Because, change is not, in order for things to change, it can be a very painful process, In the biblical text, Jeremiah the prophet is taken into the potter's house, and so he's watching this potter. So it's not just in the biblical text, but any of you who are sculptors or artists, ice sculptors. Let me take Jeremiah. I remember I was on a cruise, and this woman had this big block of ice, and I didn't know what she was doing with this ice. Like, we on a moving boat, and you got this big old block of ice by the pool. Like, man, white people, y'all be doing some crazy stuff. Why do what's going on? You come back like an hour later, and then you start to realize, man, you're turning this block of ice into something. And several hours later, they unveil it, and it's this dope kind of figure. And I reflect on that and other expressions of like what it takes to become something of value. You have to lose a lot along the way, but then there's things, as you lose things, there's other things that get unveiled, right? And so I do think there's work that justice ministry or work does to the person who's engaged in it. And it doesn't have to be like fatalistic, like you just kind of lose your life, although some people do lose their lives. But you lose naivete, you lose, a lot of, well, at least I have, you start to understand that the world is really, it's a tough place, and yet we're called to try to, as Dr. Cornel West says, turn the light on and keep the lights on as long as you can, just in case someone's poking around outside and trying to come home. Keep the porch light on, Pastor Mike, keep the porch light on. You never know when someone's trying to come home. So yeah, I do think that the work of justice has changed me. I think, there have been moments, some of it was less traumatizing, just pastoring various kinds of people. Losing young people to gun violence changed me. Sitting with mothers and grandmothers who've lost children to gun violence changed me. Sitting with queer people changed me. Going to Ferguson changed me. Sitting in the White House changed me, and all points in between, it just changes you. And the changes are not all bad, but they're just different. You kind of turn into a different person over time. And, I don't recognize all those changes because you're just kind of going through it. But, Tiffany, reminded me when we were walking in that I'm a different person.
No, what I said was when you came back from Ferguson, I met a different person. And I think that it was very present in, I think, just our conversations. It was very present in your pastoring, in your preaching. And I think it's an important point, whether or not you feel open to going there, like, why? What happened and what do you think may have shifted?
Well, when you get tear gassed, so there are several things, right? Like when I got beat up by the cops, that was the first time I was like, man, I'm doing everything right, and I still got my head cracked. Man, this is crazy. I was 22, maybe 21, 22. And it was a similar experience in Ferguson, It's like, man, we have this national campaign. We've all sat in rooms with people at the highest level of the government, from the president to, vice president, members of Congress. And we're outside here on these streets and like we're all unprotected. And I mean, it was a harrowing thing to like understand how unprotected we were. And to see young people just fearless. And I felt I was there more to just try to keep the peace and try to just be present with young people because I love young people. I love Black people, so it was the confluence of all of that, But then you just realize, man, this collar I got on is not a force field. So that tear gas went up my nose just like everybody else and arrests your lungs, and you get mishandled by very hateful law enforcement officers who thought they were doing, I guess, their job. And it just, it made a lot of, again, texts that I had read up until that point just feel it resonated at a different kind of level, I mean, it made me reconnect with the images of the Eyes on the Prize, watching Dr. King and John Lewis and Abernathy and, all these bodies getting brutalized by the cops. And you just think, man, that'll never be me, because it's like, man, that was way back then. And so, yeah, I think Ferguson triggered lots of PTSD for all of us who were there. And I think when I came home, because I was, still pastoring, so I would fly to Ferguson, St. Louis, pretty much for the first 6 months of the uprising. I was there in St. Louis for almost 3-4 days out the week, every every week, or at least every other week. And you're there because you realize, man, not only is this history, but we're just going to make a difference, And so I guess that energy, which was very intense, it just will follow me home because it was, it was embodying you, It's like the spirit was just, embodying you in that way. But it also, helped me to see the inadequacy or just the ways in which church generally was just not reaching a whole segment of people that I really love to be around, young people, folks who had a sense about righteousness and justice and fairness, but, were questioning their faith or vocalizing that they don't feel at home in the church. And so it was intoxicating, but it was also it made me read everything that I had read up until that point differently. Because I read Franz Fanon in college and in seminary, but it all hit differently in Ferguson. Because it just, the words came off the page and they became embodied, and it's hard to just divorce that from my preaching, from the way I was pastoring. And then I think more people from the community or the organizing or justice or movement spaces started to come to the church too, because they were seeing me and my brother or so many of us kind of out there and man, I want to be a part of that church, and so it was, yeah, I think it was a very, it was a very transformative time. But we all carry a lot of trauma from that, a lot of us, us who are married, our marriages were deeply impacted. So a lot of us, our marriages did not survive. A lot of us, had tons of PTSD that required therapy. And a lot of the people there, a number of them have died. People we used to march with, overdosing on fentanyl or having these mysterious deaths by the police or people, unidentified people in the community. And so, it was, you live with the memories of that too, and just kind of realize that that's the unspoken work of a certain part of the justice movement, right? There's a lot of pain in the movement that doesn't make it on the social media, you know? So.
No, and I was going to say, or doesn't get immortalized or rewarded, you know.
It gets erased. Right. Like I get texts. I haven't gotten them recently. I don't know if they took the exhibit down, but I used to get all these text messages, pictures of people walking through the African American Museum in DC, and in the exhibit, somehow made it into one of the exhibits, and I think it's a picture of me in Ferguson, like, you know, either extending my arms to pray, or we were doing a protest. And so, you know, I was like, you know, I'd never been until maybe a couple years ago. So I took Nyla, my daughter, and so we're walking through the exhibit. And as I walk through the exhibit, I see a picture of Darren Seals, who's one of our comrades there, who was, you know, murdered. I don't know if his murder ever got solved. He was murdered in St. Louis, maybe less than a year after the uprising. And they have a picture of him in the museum, but he's not identified. And, you know, I just was looking at that. I took a picture of it and I sent it to Tef Poe. And I just said, man, they got D SEALs up here in this museum. I don't even know who this man was, you know. So, you know, stuff like that. Yes. It's not only is it not immortalized, it's like people just are erased. They just are reduced to a picture, you know. And it's painful, you know. I'm sure I know it's painful for a lot of people in St. Louis and people who love D SEALs. We weren't like partners or homies. We marched together. He was very, very good friends with Tef and T-Dub, and, you know, a lot of people we rock with. We used to, you know, march in there together, and I'm still very close with a lot of them. But it's just one example of many, you know, and I'm sure this is true in every city across the country. Like, it's so many nameless faces. I mean, whenever you look at a picture of a protest, just note it. Like, that's somebody's child or son or daughter who probably left a pound of flesh out there on the pavement for whatever protest they were in. You know, it's just not some flat, you know, caricature.
Mm-hmm. There's, you know, so many like thoughts coming through my mind as you're sharing about this experience. I went there with the onset with some people from Los Angeles, and was there for a few days.
Was that the freedom, the bus freedom thing? Oh, with Patrice and them. You was there for that?
Yeah, I was there for that.
Oh, okay.
And then, you know, I think just like the history of our people and these movements, I think about like what are the results of those pounds of flesh left on I usually say on the pavement, for the 1% to 2% of us who actively move against the empire and these different points of this like long war or battle. And coming back from that, I was just resonating a lot with what you were saying about transformation of experience. That wasn't the only or the last time of engagement with activism work, but certainly was transformative for me. And oftentimes, what I've come to understand it as like a rites of passage or initiation will come with turbulence, and a part of us must die or be left behind. And I think that's like grounded in as Africans, that's a part of our understanding of the world. And then I also was like faced with this difference too, right? Like Fanon dying so early. Part of what brought me into this work was like thinking about the activists who are either disappeared by the state and unalived by the state, or die early, seemingly because of their interactions or encounters with ongoing violence. So Sal Castro, Burciaga, I'm thinking like all these, Audre Lorde, all these people. And there's like this natural, probably like universal reason to have parts of you die while you go through rites of passage. And then there's these like other deaths that, as you say, mark us and that we carry. And I'm wondering just honestly about wisdom, about where you found that difference to be, and if there's any like guidance about how to lean more into the rites of passage that we are owed and becoming more human, and these unnatural cuts and marks and disappearances of parts of ourselves.
Yeah. There's no easy way to go to heaven, and there's no easy way to go to hell. Like, whether you go to heaven or hell, it's going to be hard either way. So, I have to say, if it's going to be hard, you might as well try to ensure you're on your way to heaven, which is just to say that no one escapes this life without marks, I do think as African people, or people who have a history that predates the creation of the United States of America, and that's everybody, literally, right? Like, the United States of America is literally a creation. Everyone who's here came from somewhere else. I often tell white people, like, God didn't create you white. Like, you weren't born white. If you go further enough in your story, there's a land that produced you that had its own sensibilities of the world, its own kind of mores, religious, cultural customs and practices that are buried in your genes much longer than the 250 some years of this white supremacist society, right? And so, there is this sense that one of the challenges of being marked by the United States, or being, caught in the cycles of trauma here, is that we kind of rob ourselves from the historical kind of healing modalities that our cultures, our bodies, our genes have always tapped into. And I do think, Black churches, for a lot of Black people, is the closest thing we have to that kind of memory. But I often tell younger people who are like very post institutions, that it's really important to have something that's bigger than you, that you can like fall into, to help, create space for healing and healing from the harms of this world. Like, the lie of the United States is that we are exceptional and we are kind of our own made self, and we can just kind of, I'll never forget after 9/11, and we experienced it with the pandemic in a different kind of way most recently. But, George Bush was on the TV telling everybody, we're not going to let this destroy us or, interrupt our way of life. Go shop, go to work. And it was the same with the pandemic, like, it was just this rush to just plug yourself back into the matrix or this thing and not take time to actually heal. Can you believe that just the United States, we've easily lost 1 million people to COVID-related deaths and illnesses? Probably millions more have some kind of long-term impact of this illness, and we've not had one day of national grief. Like, people are wondering, like, why people are just so out of sorts. Like, can you imagine not being able to bury your dead? Just think of how inhumane that is in any culture to not bury your dead. all the grandmothers who died, and people couldn't even go to their grandmother's funerals. In New York, they were just putting people, digging mass graves and just putting people into boxes on the harbor, And so I just think this country has really done a number on a lot of us around, like, how do you actually deal with trauma? The best thing this country, I think, or our culture offers us is an escape from trauma. Smoke it away, drink it away, sex it away, party it away, just self-medicate however you can. And so I do think there is, a real call for all of us who believe that we're caught in a traumatized society to prioritize healing. Some of our gun violence prevention work has been about how do we actually scale up like mass healing infrastructure in this country. And healing, I use the word healing because I think it differentiates itself from, public health language, because a lot of people just don't trust public health. But in essence, why is not our public health systems in the country scaled to meet the complexity depth of the level of trauma in this country, from mass death, from desperation, from loneliness? Great Britain just established a couple years ago a minister of loneliness or isolation or something. And we don't have nothing like that in this country. It's just, it's non-existent. So my advice to people who are being marked and who are going through hardships they did not ask for, or some of us who are in professions that know that you're carrying weight that will literally change you, is to find practices, I would say spiritual practices, find a community, both your chosen community and then people that, are sometimes not chosen. Appreciate that some of this work, some of these people in your life are seasonal. They may not be there for the totality of your journey. But there is, I think, an important cycle of like healing in life and intentionality that is required for we who aspire to change the world even while we're being changed by it. And that's what I would offer to folks, like seek it out, make it something that is intentional.
When you think about the totality, was the term you used, of all that you embody, that you've experienced, particularly in relationship to your activism work, would you agree that your spirit is tired?
Yeah, I think I'm weary today. I definitely I'm weary. And it's not tired all the time. I'm looking forward to taking some time off in the next month, trying to catch my breath and see how much of the skinny Michael McBride I can recover with a trainer and a more disciplined diet and sleep and not being on all the time. But yeah, I think Solomon, at least it's attributed to Solomon, the wisdom writer, says that much knowledge brings much grief, And so, there is a heaviness I feel familiar with because we're in a hell of a condition as a people. And, if I expand it beyond just, Black people, the country is really in a bad place. And I don't fully know, how we put some of this back together again, there's so many narratives that are carrying the day that are just rife with such misinformation. And people are, a lot of us are building our lives on things that are just, if they're not false, they're radically different than what we've understood to be true, and it's everywhere, you know what I mean? And a lot of the difference is becoming weaponized, and whenever whenever fundamentalists get their ideas weaponized, usually the vulnerable catch it the most. See, we live here in the Bay Area. I know you're in DC, but that's pretty.
But the people I'm at, I'm in Baltimore.
Baltimore, sorry.
I gotta be clear about that.
Yeah, my bad.
No offense.
No offense. Yeah. Baltimore, you're a B-more guy.
Recently.
But I mean, and I've spent a little time in Baltimore. Baltimore is a tough city too. Like I have lots of friends in Baltimore. After Freddie Gray thing, we were there. One of my good friends, his brother was killed right during Freddie Gray. Another Dante Barksdale, who's one of our street outreach workers, renowned, killed in Baltimore last couple years. And so those are just the internal problems, right? We think of like the way the norms of this country's fragile democracy, formerly called, is just like unraveling right before our eyes. And, all the false equivalencies related to what, if it's a good or a bad thing. I think we're in for a really tough ride. So yeah, I feel heavy some days. My spirit is weary, but I also, get glimpses of like possibility and hope and joy that comes from the work, comes from my faith, comes from friends, from good music, from watching the 49ers win. Sorry to be so superficial. I know I was boycotting it while they were losing, but I need to watch the Super Bowl happen in my lifetime. Find a little joy in this ugly world. So yeah, I do think there's a certain. Oh, he's mad about the 49ers.
Yeah, Chauncey's great. He doesn't appreciate. No, he's a 49er fan. Oh. He's actually from Compton, but he's a 49er fan
he's a turncoat.
Through me.
Turncoat.
Yeah, he was
talking about misinformation, right?
I hear you around, and I like prompted it. I asked that because there's a way of moving and engaging in this work, whether we call it healing work, activism, that I think about what we're leaving behind for children. And I've had recent shifts in the past few years where I have a certain spiritual fatigue. And for me, I was like, this is not it. And now that I'm a parent, I think it's even, the feeling is even more intense of the ways in which my fatigue, the ways in which my frustration with this world, and Kendra and I, that's why we do a lot of work on the next world. But on this thing that we're in, it seems really hard and incredibly tiring for me, and really frightening in thinking about what I'm leaving behind for young people. So that's why so much of our work particularly is like, we always talk about, and I quote Song of Solomon, Morrison writes about this father talking to his son. His aunt had this influence on him, and she was about connection to the land, to their ancestral lineages, and he was a real estate agent. And he was telling his son, don't listen to her. She don't have nothing for you for this world. Maybe the next one, but not this one. And when I think about what I want for Kashmir and the lessons that I want to pass on, I'm trying to gather that toolkit together now. And it's hard, the conversations that I feel like I'll have to have, or that I'm fearful of how she'll navigate this. But she's young. You have older children. And so I have a lot of fascination around, and this is where you want this to go, is like, one, how does your involvement in so many ways, like everybody else's children are your children too, right? How does that, and maybe that may be a blessing, right? How do you feel like that influences your parenting, your movement work around the nation? And then the second part of that is, what do you want your children, what type of work, or what do you hope for them and how they navigate this world based on how you've had to?
If I were absolutely honest, I wish my daughters could live in the time capsule I grew up in, when life just felt so much more protected. I think, yeah. So I think what I want for all children, young people, is an opportunity to just like be a kid, but be a kid in a way where like one bad decision won't end up taking your life or your freedom from you. And that's not the society, or that's not the environment we have here in the Bay Area for sure. There's some communities perhaps where you can like be a juvenile delinquent and still make it into Yale and Duke and become the president one day. But for Black children in particular, it's like you only get a multiple bites at the apple. And that's even true for my kids who are, we're trying to like keep them from the evils and the horrors of this world, right? So that's my hope. I mean, I think the work we do across the country is just trying to like, if there's a helium balloon filled with helium, I feel like 90% of it is punitiveness towards our kids and families. And I would like to have a world where punitiveness is not in such abundance when it comes to our children. Like I grew up playing video games, so much so that my father used to say, "It's a demon." Back then everything was a demon. You got a lying demon, you got a smoking demon, you got a stealing demon. And so somehow the Nintendo made it onto the demon list, because I would just play them video games for hours and I would lose every time, but I would keep playing. Right? Imagine the world for young people where they could keep playing and lose and still feel so like I'm gonna keep coming back and trying this until I win. Well, I don't know a lot of places. Maybe sports, maybe. I don't know. Because I played sports and lost a lot, but you go to practice the next day. But I don't. School's ain't a place where you can like fail and like church. We talked about church. It's not like that for everybody. On the job, I mean, so you gotta like figure this thing out real quick on top of like all the stuff you inherit from other people that you just like. I'm not, I walked into a store and literally today, just get me some cran grape. I just want a little bit of sugar. They didn't have it. I walked out and the lady's like, "Sir, you got to pay for it. I just kept walking. She's like, "Please don't steal from the store." I looked there, I was like, "Lady, I'm not here to steal no cran grape from you." But, I kind of felt a little compassion when I got to the car. It's like, man, someone must be stealing from her store every day. You think like I'm here to steal some cran grape juice from you. But, that's been my story my whole life. Like you walk into a store and people just think you're stealing. I ain't never stole nothing a day in my life from a store, right? So stuff you didn't inherit. So, yeah, I want a world where kids and families don't have that punitiveness. For my girls, I don't know, man. I just want them to be happy and safe, whatever they do. Like, I hope they don't go into anything that I'm involved in. I hope they like go. I hope they find a partner that loves them and keeps them safe and doesn't abuse them, and they don't abuse their part. I just hope they just have a life where they can find joy and not be trying to, solve the problems of the world. Because, they've had to grow up with my life, our life, and it's, it's, it's not always been easy, I remember when Donald Trump won the elections, and I was traveling, and I think one of my daughters was crying while I was gone. I was thinking, is Donald Trump going to kill Daddy? I think they asked that. And, I was like, that in her mind, like I'm like I'm somebody worthy of being killed by Donald Trump, right? But like not every kid has to worry about that, So I hope that they can have a life where they don't have to carry those anxieties and, I don't know, maybe they need to live in another country. I hear people moving to Lisbon, Portugal. I may move there. No, I'm just playing. I'm gonna go visit though. I like Lisbon a lot. It's kind of a privileged thing to do, probably. But yeah, I hope that for everybody in the world, not just United States or my kids. Like, I remember I was in Morocco and I got lost driving from Casablanca to Marrakesh, and my GPS took me all through these mountains. And so I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and I stumbled onto a kid herding goats in the middle. Like I had so much Islamophobia in me. I was thinking, man, I'm out here, bin Laden, somebody's out there gonna kidnap me. I'm just gonna be all messed up. But it was just so fascinating watching this kid in the middle of nowhere herding goats with a radio. I was so fascinated by that because I was like, this is this person's life, And so, people all over the world, like their lives are wrought with all kinds of different experiences or challenges. I just hope we can make the world a nicer, more loving place to be. And certainly I hope that for my kids. I hope that for your kids who are listening to this. I hope that for all of us.
You got anything else, brother?
I don't know. I'm sitting with this one.
Sorry, I came in here heavy. It's been a rough 48 hours.
That's heavy.
I could tell more. I could tell more jokes if you want me to.
Heavy is definitely on brand this season.
Heavy is our brand. Is that y'all?
It's on brand. On brand this season.
Yeah.
Maybe that should be the title of my next book. Heavy is our brand.
You got a lot to put in that book.
I was in Chicago taking a picture, a headshot for something, and I had on my black coat that I had for maybe since the days of Ferguson. And the coat was a jet black corduroy jacket. And it was lost on me until the photographer said, "Was like, man, that's a nice brown coat. Where'd you get that?" And I was like, "We thought this is a black coat." He was like, "What do you mean?" And so I'm looking at the coat, and it's faded into brown on the outside, but on the inside it's still black. And I was like, man, this is crazy. I've been doing this long enough. This coat used to be black. And the brother sitting there, That, man, that's a great title to a book. He said, I would buy that book. I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, this coat used to be black. I've been sitting and I was like, man, is that going to be the title of my book? This coat used to be black. Take a picture of my brown coat on the cover and tell all my stories of reflection and learning and whatnot. But, you know, all in all, I'm a privileged person for sure. You know, not everybody gets to wake up every day and do this kind of work and, you know, live relatively comfortably and stuff like that. So I think of our ancestors who had to do this and go pick cotton and, you know, clean homes of, you know, slave masters and stuff like that. So, you know, but it is heavy at whatever area you're doing this kind of work. It's you got to be called to it. And so, you know, take breaks and love on yourself and find folks that can love on you and remember that you're holding a baton. You got to pass it to somebody eventually. So it ain't going to die with you, right? So do your part and start finding your marathon successor. Try to enjoy your years of your limited years on this great planet God has gifted to us.
Yes, Lord. On that note, let's give it up for the one and only
All right, thank you.
Michael McBride.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all.
We will embrace a apocalypse. We will embrace an unveiling that says that education is here to bring us life.